Hello everyone, hope you are doing good. So in this class we are going to talk about vertebral artery and circle of Willis. Okay, so vertebral artery, as we all know, it is a branch of subclavian artery. It passes through the cervical vertebrae, it enters the brain. Okay, so in the cervical vertebrae, okay, so I'm just going to zoom this portion. Okay, in the cervical vertebrae, this vertebral artery, it passes through a foramen called as foramen transversarium. Okay, foramen transversarium. So once it passes through the foramen transversarium, it passes through the cervical vertebrae. After reaching the base of the skull, it is going to enter via a foramen called as foramen magnum. Okay, so once the vertebral artery via the foramen magnum enters the brain, it is going to give off a lot of branches. Okay, each and every branch is very important because any occlusion or any damage to these vessels is going to cause serious problems. Okay, and the blood vessels which you're going to see now is a great example of anastomosis. You'll see a lot of anastomosis of blood vessels in the upcoming lecture. Okay, so now this vertebral artery, it moves up. This is the inferior view of the brain. Okay, it moves up, enters the foramen magnum, and then it gives off a branch. This branch, okay, this branch is called as the posterior inferior cerebellar artery. Posterior inferior cerebellar artery. Similar way, this is the posterior inferior cerebellar artery. Okay, this posterior inferior cerebellar artery again gives off another branch here. This is the posterior spinal artery. So the vertebral artery, it moves up via foramen magnum. As it moves up, it gives off the first branch, which is nothing but the posterior inferior cerebellar artery, and the posterior inferior cerebellar artery gives off what is called as the posterior spinal artery. Okay, now again it moves up, and at this point it fuses and moves down, right? So this portion is called as this portion where it fuses and moves down is the anterior spinal artery. Okay, so the vertebral artery, it moves up, posterior inferior cerebellar artery, it moves up, fuses, and that branch is called as the anterior spinal artery. Okay, I hope it's clear. Now, this vertebral artery further moves up. Okay, so this is the medulla, this is the pons. So it further moves up towards the pons, and then what happens? It gives a it forms a very important branch that is called as the basilar artery. Okay, that is called the basilar artery. This entire portion is the basilar artery. Okay, so the vertebral artery moves up, it fuses, it forms the basilar artery. So in the basilar artery, it gives off the first branch. This is the first branch, that is called as the anterior inferior cerebellar artery. Very easy. See, this is the posterior inferior cerebellar artery. This is the anterior inferior cerebellar artery. So the basilar artery gives off anterior inferior cerebellar artery. Next, this branch is called the labyrinthine branch. This is the labyrinthine artery. And these small branches, these are the pontine branches or the pontine artery. Okay, so vertebral artery, it enters via foramen transversarium from the cervical vertebrae. It moves up, enters the brain via foramen magnum, and then it gives off the first branch, which is the posterior inferior cerebral artery, PICA. And this posterior inferior cerebral artery gives off what is called as the posterior spinal artery. It moves up, it fuses, and the fused part is called gives off what is the anterior spinal artery, and further it moves up, it fuses, it forms the basilar artery. This is a very important anastomosis. Okay, so the basilar artery gives off the first branch. This is the anterior inferior cerebral artery, and this branch is the labyrinthine branch, and the further smaller branches are pontine branches, since it is in the pons. Okay, it makes sense. Okay, now this basilar artery, as it moves up, it gives off what is called as the superior cerebellar artery. Superior cerebellar artery. And further moving, very important, this anastomosis is very important, and further moving up. Okay,